Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. If I could get your attention up here, we're going to get started. My name is Kathy Gerthofer, and I work over in the Family Resource Initiative. Hi, Rose. We are so glad that you're here this morning to join us for yet another Lunch and Learn. On your table, ladies, on your table you'll find a couple of things for your information. This is the Family Resource Brochure. It explains everything that we do across the hall, from lending our hope to others, as well as healing and just providing support for all kinds of reasons. And you'll also find a new card on your table. This card allows us to know what you think, what your needs might be, any suggestions you have for us. So if you wouldn't mind filling that out at some point today, that would be helpful. Sitting here to my right is Todd Mulliken, who visits us yet one more time. Today he's talking to us about narcissism. Todd comes to us with great experience in the world of counseling, right? And healing of others. I think that you have a pretty vast category of kids, teens, right? Teens and family counseling, marriage counseling, all kinds of things. So Todd, why don't you come on up and join us? Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Kathy. Appreciate it. Well, this is such deja vu because back in 1999, I gave my first talk on narcissism at Century College. And we were just kind of talking about it back then. What is this? And what do we know about it? What is it? And boy, you know, being in the counseling field since the mid-'80s, I've never seen anything like it the last 5 years. I've never seen anything like it, ever. In terms of, so back in 2011, we almost took narcissistic personality disorder out of the personality disorder category. And I asked somebody about that, who was doing the DSM work. DSM is kind of our criteria that we use to actually diagnose individuals with a variety of different issues, whatever they're struggling, right? And people that do that diagnosing are really in the trenches, they're really mindful about it, they use critical thinking skills, they use tons of research, they are just in the trenches, and what they come up with is usually what I see. I mean, I think it's very accurate. But in 2011, they were saying, do we even want to keep this in our criteria? And I asked, why is that? And they said, well, it's just so difficult to know how to really diagnose it. Because, for example, somebody could have untreated anxiety where they worry like crazy, right? And they're just riddled with fear. And then because of that anxiety, they are unintentionally over-managing the home, over-managing their kiddos, really over-managing their partner, and they show narcissistic traits. Does that make sense? So a lot of times what we see is people that have actually untreated other mental health issues that comes off like narcissism. And so right now, it's such a buzzword and thrown out so quickly. The truth is we have a 6% lifetime prevalence of narcissistic personality disorder, right? But boy, if you think about it, it seems like it's a 70% right now, right? The word is thrown out a lot. So let's talk about the actual 9 symptoms if we can. What is it? And then we'll talk about what causes it. We'll talk about whatever you want to talk about with it, by the way. I want this to be your time. I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for questions. So there's 9 symptoms of this personality disorder called narcissism. not to bore you to tears, but a personality disorder, there's 10 of them that we have, that we work from. And narcissism is still in what we call cluster B, which are the dramatic personality disorders, like borderline personality disorder, histrionic, antisocial personality disorder. Anybody fading yet with, am I losing you with the post-lunch stuff here? So there's a lot of, so it's still in that cluster, but what we're doing with the clusters is we'll probably get rid of that by the time the next DSM comes out. The last DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, we're in our 5th edition. 2013 came out the last one. We did a revised editing. You do that about halfway through back in 22, just a year ago. Added some really good stuff about cultural issues, racial disparities, other things. Really helpful to understand mental health concerns from a variety of perspectives, right? So really good work. But they're probably going to get rid of the clusters, and we're going to go with what's more a continuum, right? The truth is somebody, at the 9 symptoms I'm going to share in a minute, somebody could have one of them, and somebody could have all 9, right? And that's a big difference. Somebody that has all 9 is going to be on that end of potential psychopathy, really intentional exploitation, premeditated. Somebody that has the 1 or 2 may have grown up with their own trauma, and now they're just in self-protection mode because they feel like they're back in the trauma, so they do lack empathy, as well as some of the other mental health disorders lack empathy too. For example, somebody could have untreated autism, which is a beautiful thing to diagnose and to heal and to treat and to walk alongside, but empathy is really elusive for that human, right? It's really difficult. Biologically, we've seen that. So there's other issues like that. So I think it's important that we always know this is on a continuum. Mild, moderate, or severe. Does that make sense? So 9 symptoms. First one is they expect to be acknowledged for things greater than they do. So there will be embellishment. There will be, kind of brings it back to themselves. Do you remember to acknowledge what I did? Or why haven't you said kind things to me the last 12 hours? Right? Or like, hey, this is really, yeah. It's just that sense of wanting to be acknowledged for things greater than they do. I'm going to skip to the 4th symptom next because it's kind of like the first. And that is an excessive need to be admired. Right? So we all would like to be admired, right? If we're honest, that's okay. It's one of the 5 love languages, yay. But the excessive need to be admired usually shows up with a hypersensitivity to any criticism at all. Like, boom. And nobody says, oh, thank you for criticizing me. That was wonderful. Please share more. Nobody's amazing, right, when we're being criticized. It's hard. Easier to say hard things, harder to hear hard things, right? The second symptom is there's preoccupation with fantasies. So the key word is preoccupation. Preoccupation with fantasies of power, brilliance, success, wait for it, beauty, and ideal love. So oftentimes when I'm working with somebody that's in an affair, it's really challenging because that second symptom of narcissism kind of comes in the mailbox because they really feel truly like they found ideal love. They've married the wrong person. They're with the right person now. This is ideal love. And really, they get on a fair island, and it's very isolating, and it has a strong narcissistic trait to it, typically. If that makes sense. The third is kind of a sense that they feel special. Like, I'm kind of a big deal, and you just don't get it, right? Like, you don't see that I'm a big deal. I'm important. I'm happy to spend time with you. Kind of patronizing, does that make sense? And they're kind of just, and the 9th symptom is they have kind of an arrogant and haughty attitude, right? So those two get kind of combined oftentimes. Tracking so far? Okay. Somebody said preach, I think. No, just kidding. So then the next symptom, so where are we at? 1, 2, 3, 4. So 5 is a sense of entitlement. This one keeps me busy over the holidays, by the way. A sense of entitlement and expecting automatic compliance to their wishes and expecting extra favorable treatment. So it's kind of like, hey, this is when we do this. We've done this the last 100 years. This is how we do things. And if this doesn't happen this way, you're in or you're out, right? It's kind of this answer to their wishes, right? And a sense of entitlement in that. The 6th symptom can be really misinterpreted a lot. I've been married 34 years. There are plenty of times when my wife and I are in conflict where I'll feel like she's against me. She'll feel like I'm against her, right? Realizing that's not true. We're for each other in Christ. We love each other. We have a great marriage. But when we're hurting each other unintentionally, we might even feel like, are you trying to do that to me today? And next thing you know, I'll look up covert narcissism and say, that's who you are. Okay, so I see a lot of that too. I see a lot of overdiagnosing. I've seen marriages break up by that. I've seen individual therapists say for sure your spouse is that when they've never met that person. Okay, I've seen a lot of that. And sometimes it's amazingly true. Oh my gosh, that's what I've been living with. And that person does need help and I need boundaries now. Right? But it ain't always one or the other. And that's where we got to get our critical thinking caps on, be dependent on the Holy Spirit as our wise counselor, as our guide, as our advocate. Right? So the 6th symptom is the capacity to exploit others. Okay, so, but what I've seen in the 1 versus 9 kind of idea, the person that's 1 is like, hey, you hurt me, so, I'm not gonna do what Todd says, speak without offending, listen without defending, own your own stuff, come back, go look in the mirror verse, take the log out of your own eye, work on yourself first. It's easier to go, yeah, look what you did to me, and I'm gonna protect myself against you now because you've done this to me. So what's the truth about that dynamic? Has that been going on a long time? So the other thing I tell my people a lot right now is see the other, don't wear their stuff. See them, don't wear it. See it, don't wear it. Right? See them, see their story, what is true, but don't wear their stuff. So the 6th symptom is about exploitation. And of the 9, I think that one's been probably the one I've seen kind of misinterpreted the most. The 7th is the hardest to treat, and that is an unwillingness or lack of capacity to empathize. And that's the big one, right? And in the conflict of a family dynamic, in the conflict of a marital dynamic, in a conflict of a friend dynamic, there are going to be times when we feel like that person lacks empathy. They don't see my point of view. They're not listening to me. They don't hear me. They don't understand me. And that is true. And is there another dynamic that's going on where this is a sense of mutuality in this? Or is it clearly like a pattern of behavior? Because to have a personality disorder, there needs to be a chronic, maladaptive pattern of behavior. It ain't kind of isolated, it's pervasive. Bipolar disorder will be episodic. It won't be pervasive as much, right? So anything that's a personality disorder, it's a pervasive pattern of behavior. All right, the 8th symptom is the idea of jealousy. So some people, and by the way, I had a little lesion on my lip last week. You can't make it up. So I had it removed. And the doc says, I'll just remove it quick. I said, well, I got to teach at a college in an hour. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. So took it out. It's non-cancerous yet. And whoop, put a bunch of something in it. So I've got I'm talking like that for an hour. So anyway, if I'm a little babbly, it's because my lip's still like trying to catch up from the surgery. So the 8th symptom is is you're jealous of others. And I think we all can go there sometimes, right? We'll get jealous of others sometimes. It's not supposed to be. 1 Corinthians 13 lays that out nicely. But it's easy, I think, to go there. But the second half of the 8th symptom is, this is the big one, is that they think others are jealous of them. Ouch, right? So I don't know about you, but I can't remember the last time I looked in the mirror like, okay, these 23 people are jealous of me and I'm kind of a big deal, right? Right, so that can be a thing with people that have narcissism. So what are the main causes in these 9 symptoms? And you have to have at least 5 of them to have the personality disorder, by the way. Okay, you have to have 5 of those 9. The 9th one, I mentioned it earlier, sorry, is they will have arrogant or haughty behavior. Okay, they exhibit that. It kind of rounds it out pretty well, I think, that 9th symptom. Kind of is the overall kind of typical posture that we see. So, so causes, sorry, this thing's getting in my way. I see the clock, great. So the causes, I would say there's 2 main causes. One that I don't think we talk about enough is more often when I'm working with somebody with what we call NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, is that they grew up oftentimes in some emotional Vietnam. I mean, there's knives flying emotionally in the kitchen. You know, there's shame all over. It's a shame storm. It's survival. There's bullying. And now what are they doing when they're a big person? If you're bullied, you eventually bully, right? So if we don't treat that root cause of why they have intended to make sure they're not going to lose any fight now, because the book I just wrote a couple years ago it's called Being Right versus Being Liked, the impact of narcissism and codependency on couples and families. So one of the things I've seen is somebody that grew up in a lot of shame, a lot of trauma, chronic, and so their story is chronic. You know, they might not see it when they're in college or when they're working, sometimes earlier on, but eventually it comes into the home, and what they saw the first 18 years, buckle up, here we go again, repeating the same patterns. So I don't think we talk about that enough, personally, that there's oftentimes trauma. The other kind is actually, I think, even more difficult to treat, and that is growing up with a lot of entitlement. Growing up with always kind of being a big deal, and they're always right, they're a big deal. And so that entitlement continues, and that condescending, that I'm right, you just don't get it. I have a need to be right, I've always been right, I've always gotten my way, and I continue to get my way, and God has told me I'm doing the right thing and that you don't understand, right? So there can be hyper-spiritualization in that dance. And that, I think, is even harder to treat, right? Sometimes the trauma work, although long, sometimes I have found people that are more open to maybe getting help because they're starting to see that their 17-year-old won't talk to them anymore. Or their 14-year-old is choosing to be, if it's a dad narcissist, the daughter is choosing to be with young boys that are just hurtful and destructive, or the other way around. The mom is narcissistic, the daughter is taking on, you know what I'm talking about? Just the same gender of the parent that has the narcissism. Sometimes if one of the kids just is so shut down now because they're so exhausted by it, sometimes that's the wake-up call. And then the therapy is so critical, right? That trust piece, because most of the time narcissists don't come in, their spouses come in, right? The adult child comes in, not the grandparent or whoever has the diagnosis. So those are the main 2 causes. The third thing I want to talk about, I teased earlier, is what we call comorbidity in my field. Comorbidity means that oftentimes, like for example with ADHD, there's about a 9% lifetime prevalence with kids with ADHD, 4 to 5% adults. Women are still underdiagnosed with that. We're still overdiagnosing boys and men with it and underdiagnosing females with it in general. And so let's say in that particular case, somebody has a lot of distractibility, and they're really anxious about school, and they're inattentive. right? And school feels like a foreign language, and reading is really hard. I see you, and then I'm talking to you, and then, ooh, I read that sentence, ooh, just right, moving around. And so they come in, and they would naturally meet the criteria for both generalized anxiety disorder, excessive worry, feeling keyed up and on edge, restlessness, and irritability. Knock those out. And they would also meet the criteria for either a combined type of ADHD, the impulsive hyperactive, as well as the inattentive, or just the inattentive. But which is driving which, right? If the truth is they have ADHD, that's neurodevelopmental, that's very genetic, like the worry gene is, and if we're just treating the anxiety, we're not going to help, right? So the truth is they have ADHD, but they have a comorbid anxious condition. Does that make sense? So both are true, and it helps us to treat them more effectively. Same way with narcissism. I have plenty of situations, like I mentioned earlier, somebody has untreated anxiety, and now we have covert narcissism a lot, and that's more for the quiet type of. So let's say somebody is a shutdown under stress, and they grew up being bullied, and they shut down, and they lock up, and they won't say anything for a week, a month, a year, and they're rigid, and they lack empathy, and boy, they've got that kind of posture of more of a quiet kind of narcissistic framework. So back when I talked in 2000, we didn't have 5 types. We still don't have any of those other diagnoses that are official, by the way, but we use them quite a bit, the covert, the malignant, the communal, different types of narcissism. But yeah, that has, really helpful stuff to it, but also stuff that hasn't been helpful, in my opinion. So sometimes the anxiety isn't in control, it's in avoidance, right? People that battle anxiety sometimes are very avoidant. They avoid the mess because of the worry. So what if they have untreated anxiety and social anxiety disorder, and they shut down, they turtle up under stress, and they will not come out, and their spouse is maybe a little bit like, please, what's going on? What's wrong with you? And even doing it really, really well, it's like it ain't working. Nothing's working. It's really on that person. It's not on the spouse. What is that? And I think these days we're saying for sure it's covert narcissism because they check all the boxes. It may be, but it also may be untreated anxiety, and they need help with the anxiety so they don't avoid anymore, so they don't shut down anymore, so they don't hold against anymore. So there's comorbidity with anxiety and narcissism. There's comorbidity with depression and narcissism. Same thing, somebody that has a major depressive disorder, the most common disorder in the world, they will shut down and have excessive guilt. The inner critic is really, really loud, whether it's their biology, their family of origin, or the prince of darkness, or all of the above, whatever the cocktail is. They have excessive guilt, and they are locked up, and they are freezing under stress, and they haven't moved, and they actually have untreated bipolar 2, which has long depressive episodes. Well, that can look like that type of narcissism too that I mentioned earlier. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of comorbidity that we see, and let's just make sure we know what we're treating. So, talked about the symptoms, talked about the causes, talked about the comorbidity. Let's talk about boundaries, right? So how do we, if we're living in that, if we have a parent with that, if we have a young adult with that, or if we wonder if we have that, what do we get to do with that? I'm a big believer in what we get to do in the pursuit of abundance versus what we have to do out of obligation and playing not to lose. What do we get to do, right? So the first boundary I would talk about is honest conversations. So these are really hard. They usually don't go great. The honest conversation would look something like, hey, this is what I've been experiencing, and it feels like this to me. What do you think? So we're creating an invitation, and usually that person, if they have untreated stuff, they're going to feel interrogated, they're going to feel attacked, even if you just do it perfectly, right? That's really hard. But because honesty today will certainly try to prevent problems tomorrow. So a lot of times codependency just wears it. They don't give care, they care take, right? They wear it. And so it's exhausting. And the codependency is just so hard, right? They take it on, it's exhausting to live with. So honesty today will prevent problems tomorrow, because now we've had an honest conversation, and even if that doesn't go well, now that issue is on the table, and I'm going to continue to talk about it. And it'll get worse before it gets better, if it does get better. But I see you in it. I see your story. I know you. I'm for you. I'm hurt. I'm lonely. But tell me where you're at. What do you think? So, doesn't go well. Most of the time it won't, because fight or flight wins there. And rarely did that person have a dynamic in their story that said, where the dominant parent said, hey, I love you. I'm for you. I see you. I'm so sorry I screamed at you. They're left alone in that. So their self-protection is loud, and they can't wait to come home and kick the dog when they get older emotionally. All right, so the first boundary is released. Romans 12:9 says love must be sincere. So it's hard, it's not easy, it's not going to go well, but thankfully, as you're acquainted with the scriptures, we see it's not a party. It's hard. Kingdom life is hard sometimes, really hard. The second boundary, if the first boundary doesn't work, and we can't get any traction, and we can't see hey, I've been seeing somebody for a while, would you mind getting help? I think it would be helpful. I know how that sounds, but I got my own stuff I'm working on. Model, don't instruct, model. Right? Am I modeling, or am I just building a case against? Am I modeling, or am I building a case against? And most times these days, people are building a case against the other. When I do couples therapy, it's mostly a case against the other. They don't build a case for, they build a case against. So the second boundary is what I call loving detachment, or medium chill, where we just don't take it on as much. We see their story, we see the struggles, we set the boundary now of honest conversations, and we're going to be a little more detached. We're not going to build a resentment bank against, because that's on us. But we're going to, be honest and then create a little distance. Then the third boundary is actual separation, where nothing's working, abuse continues. Then we create a boundary of separation, where we talk about what separation would look like. And none of this is easy, by the way, or overnight. But we actually get to that point of a separation where we talk about that and what does that look like. So boundaries are meant to help you and I operate in our wise mind and bring clarity, and not give us power over, but empathy for. Okay, because I know what I'm feeling, and I think I got that right. I have a person in my life who's kind of holding me accountable. It's all good that we have that kind of support. And so I think this is what I'm seeing. But I don't know for sure. I don't want to be haughty about it, but this is what I think. So we bring it up, doesn't go well, it gets worse. Sometimes separation is needed. In-house, actual separate dwellings. So there's boundaries, they're meant to help us operate at our best. They're clear, they help us see what is true about what we think makes the next step best. But we have to be defined by our intention, not their reaction. Okay, we need to be defined by our intention, not their reaction. All right, last part, and I'll be quiet, I think is treatment. Nothing works, just kidding, but it's hard. It's hard, but the beautiful part about it, and I'm just going to throw this out. So 20 years ago, I was up here talking about borderline personality disorder. We'd be doing the same thing. We'd be saying, nothing's working, it's really hard. Boy, you don't want to have 2 or 3 borderlines in your practice, that's really hard. And that's just judgy and horrible. Right? They're humans. What's their story? Instead of saying what's wrong with you, say what happened. What happened? Right? I mean, who am I to say, hey, I kind of got it together, I'm pretty well adjusted, and right? How's that look, right? How's my Pharisee robe looking? Whoa, right? So I think there's that 50-yard line we're trying to get the truth and the grace, right? The walking alongside, but having ironclad boundaries, not enduring this and pretending, but also inviting versus interrogating, right? So a treatment that I have found that's been helpful, if they're a person of faith, is just a consistent road trip back and seeing what's happened in their story, and let them start talking about their story for a while. Give them a chance to talk about the story, listen to the story, see them in the story, pick moments of how they maybe tonight they can reparent themselves or see themselves as God sees them amidst the violence they grew up with, amidst the emotional trauma they grew up with. Starting to see their story, starting to then see what do they want to do today with their 17-year-old, and ideally with their spouse that isn't repeating the pattern of what they saw, because they're actually repeating the pattern. And if they trust the therapist, eventually they say, I don't want to repeat the pattern. But a lot of times it's hard to get there. Most of the time they're in and they're out, because they don't really want to hear it, because, they don't want to hear it. And then when they do hear it, and then when they do get better with that kind of road trip, long-term, really regular prayer practices, really regular mindfulness meditation practice, if they're not of faith, or if they are of faith, using mindfulness in a great way, whatever, right? And using that as a way to slow everything down and realize I don't have to recreate the Vietnam that I grew up in. I get to maybe practice that a little bit today. And then the dilemma ends up being, at that point, 6 months to 2 years in, sometimes the family's going, no thanks, right? Like, it's been 20 years, we're happy for you for the therapy, but I don't trust it. And of course, why would they, right? So once in a while I bump into that, and I bring the family and not say what's wrong, but just have them make sure they're getting help for what they've been through. Right, and take the time they need, and then working with the client who has that disorder, who's maybe getting a little bit better in it, are they going to see them the way they expect to be seen now? Are they going to practice this at all? Are they going to see, I understand why my spouse does not want to be with me still. I get that because of what I've done. That's that healthy remorse versus shame. Healthy remorse versus shame. Shame means I am bad. Remorse means that, I've been convicted, I've done something that's hurtful. Big difference in how the body wears that, right? So long-term therapy is the only thing I've seen work for that. Personality disorders like narcissism and borderline, there is no FDA-approved drug that works for it. That would be great. So just so you know, people with borderline that have it, if they are on a serotonin drug or something else, it'll be helpful for like the depression or the anxiety, right? For the regulation. But I go to national conferences every year with all the people doing all the work in the FDA trials, and still, I just heard one a couple years ago on, I think I maybe talked about this last year, called border polar. It's not an actual diagnosis, but it's people that have both borderline personality disorder and bipolar. And still the research is saying that the medicinal part of the personality disorder, if you think about it, it's chronic trauma, right? It's ongoing. With borderline, it's more like, I love you, I hate you, I wish you were not born, I'm so glad you're my son or daughter, back and forth, push and pull, and that's what they do when they become a big person. They overvalue somebody, then they devalue somebody, just like that, because that's what they saw. So unfortunately, there isn't a medicine that just slows it all down, typically. Now, sometimes the slowing down of the medicine can help in other parts, and maybe eventually help a little bit of the personality disorder. So the best treatment is really the commitment to long-term care. And then I've kind of seen it depends on the person. Most of the people I've worked with that have stayed, which isn't a ton, it's probably 5%, right? I mean, it's totally anecdotal. But if you have, 20 people coming in that are accused of being narcissistic, it's rare that they stay. But 20 years ago, that's how we felt about borderline personality disorder. And then something called DBT came into the mix, dialectical behavior therapy. That's a combination of lots of different therapy styles, and long-term work has brought like amazing transformation to people with borderline personality disorder sometimes. Amazing stuff. Because guess what? We're seeing their story. I don't think we're seeing stories of narcissists yet. Okay, I don't think we're seeing their story, which doesn't mean we have to accept it. Please don't hear that. We don't have to endure it. But we get to see it. So, that's what I got. Usually that's 3 hours, and I want to give you guys time to.
So we'll help you out here. If anybody has any questions, I think Todd would love to answer your questions.
I have one. Do they subcategorize narcissism? Like, I was trying to figure my mother out.
Yeah.
And I have a narcissistic bully, and I don't really know what happened in her past because she won't talk.
Right.
I've tried that on
Yeah.
conversations.
Yep.
Now I'm at separation.
Right.
But do they subcategorize?
And tell me more what you mean by that. Are you asking?
Bully, well, it's my way or the highway.
Yes. Oh, yeah. What does that look like? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So do they? So I'm trying to get clarity. Is subcategorizing saying like, do we have subcategories for people like that? Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. So that person would, of those 9 that we talked about, those 9 symptoms, that entitlement's loud, right? They're very entitled because they never won a fight. Now they're going to win every fight. They're going to win every fight. When you disagree with them, they don't feel disagreed with. They feel attacked. No, Mom, I don't mean to attack you. I'm for you. I'm just disagree with that. Boom, right? Boom. No, the trauma just crushes them. They're too loud. They don't want to get help. Why would they want to get? I figured out a way where I can manage my life by controlling others. Okay, now that isn't like, hey, I get to do that and woohoo. Now, if she grew up with all entitlement and didn't grow up with trauma, and she did kind of run over people with trucks every day, in Edina or wherever, like entitlement land. I live there, by the way. Okay, and EP's got it, Tonka's got it. It's all over the place, right? So I'm not throwing shade at my own city. I love my city. Yeah. So anyway, you know what I mean. So entitlement can be in the water. So again, what's the truth about her story? We want to see her story. We want to walk alongside her. We want to have good boundaries. We're in separation mode. I see you, Mom. I love you, but I need space. And this is what hurts, and I'm not okay with that. It hurts. Yeah, so subcategories can happen, and it looks like traits like that.
Another
Thanks
question?
for sharing that. It's really good.
I can shout out. Is there a typical sort of friend that a narcissist tends to pick?
Wow, what a great question. Yeah, it tends to be people that agree with them, right? Right. It tends to be compliant. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Like, oh, this is hard. Right. They tend, because what happens if you challenge somebody, they don't feel challenged. They feel misrepresented. They feel that 4th symptom lights up like a Christmas tree, right? The excessive need to be admired. Hey, I'm just challenging you. I love you, brother. Boom, they're out of your life, right? In or out. So they tend to spend time with people that will agree with them or will kind of follow them or, let some stuff go like, oh, no biggie. Like, he's just the life of the party. I know he kind of ran her over with a truck emotionally, but, well, right? So that's who they tend to spend time with. Do you have any thoughts about that? Do you have any thoughts about that, or does that resonate, or what do you think?
I'm trying to piece it together.
Got it, huh?
I'm a little slow to process.
No, it's all good. Hey, it only took me 42 years, so we got time. Yeah, go ahead.
Somebody have a hand up? Anybody else?
I'm trying to understand this, because I'm trying to grasp the whole thing. So I'm kind of saying to myself, is he saying that they don't have control over all their emotions that run through our systems, and they take it to the extreme on that emotion, and no one can understand them that way? Or is it they're using their emotion as an excuse to treat people the way they want to treat them?
Ready for my great 50-yard line question or answer? It's like, yes. Yeah. Right, it's a both and this is what's really important. Each case is different. There are times when the truth is the trauma was so loud and they never learned how to regulate. They didn't learn mindfulness in school as a kid. They certainly at home from 4 to 10 at night was just warfare. It was chronic. And so it's very dysregulated, and they don't get something in the mail when they're 22 or a new brain chip that says, whoop, now we're good, right? It just doesn't happen. So that can, and in those kind of cases, they don't really have control until they decide. And also, like, when you're winning a fight, there's vindication for all the things you lost, right? So you like winning now because you never won growing up. So then that's where I think we get a little slippery. Well, they're intending to do it sometimes. And then there are people, right, that have exploited most of their life, others, and they keep doing it. and they know exactly what they're doing. I'm just somebody that doesn't think like everybody that has it severe knows exactly what they're doing. Now, the 9, if you're on the psychopathy end of it, and then you have what's called antisocial personality disorder, which is people that have limited pro-social emotions, empathy, gratitude, forgiveness, very limited, lack of consciousness, right? And I think I've seen both there. I've seen both that con because they've always conned, and I've seen both they con because that's how they get through life because they always got bullied, and they keep doing it, right? So the good news about it is that if I'm living in that, I am going to create real good boundaries. I'm going to see them. I'm not going to endure it. I'm going to see it, though. I'm not going to endure it, but I'm also not going to wear it. I don't want to be defined by how their life is. I want to be defined by who I'm becoming and then seeing their story. So, great question, and I would answer it. My own 2 cents would be it's kind of a both and.
How about when boundaries are misinterpreted by a person like that? Yeah. And they say you are not dealing very Christianly with them.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, and what we do is we don't wear that. Because I always say speak without offending, listen without defending. I usually tell the person if they're kind of in a codependent posture, I don't have to defend. I just go, yeah, it sounds like you're struggling with that and you see inconsistency in my faith. I hear you, but I'm feeling solid in my choice. And, I see you in that. But because usually what I would do is I'll get defensive and I'm going to come up with a zinger to really, because then it just keeps it going, right? So yeah, that's a great point. Because of their excessive need to be admired, they will interpret a boundary as, a violation, or kind of wonder what you're doing to them.
So I think most of us know that with anxiety and depression, that can be something that can run in the family, and you can be predisposed to that. What about narcissism?
Yeah, and both with borderline and narcissism, we talk about genetic factors, but the studies aren't overly conclusive at this point, right? So, but you can tell, usually for the person that grew up in trauma, at least one or 1.5 of the parents really usually grew up in their own trauma, and it's really bad, and now it's just bad, and now it's really bad again or whatever. So I don't know that I would say there's genetic variations necessarily, but I also know about epigenetics. So epigenetics says, usually we believe our genetic makeup, how God has wired us, our code, if you will, can impact our environment that we create and choose. But epigenetics says, yeah, but also your environment that you're in can also change your brain structure. Does that make sense? So whether there is genetic markers or not, eventually they grow up in that Vietnam, if you will. That's going to be what's part and parcel, what's normative for them. And it'll be a combination of a potential vulnerability, because the other point is you got 4 kids that grew up in that Vietnam home I'm talking about. Not all 4 come out with narcissistic personality disorder, right? So genetics matters a little bit. And same way with PTSD. We're learning about PTSD. We could all be involved in the same war that we're experiencing, but not every one of us is going to walk out with actual PTSD. So there are genetic variations that matter too. Yeah.
All right, so do narcissists accuse you of being narcissistic?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, hey, how long you got, right? I do couples therapy, right? So oh, sorry. Do narcissists accuse me of being a narcissist? Oh, sorry. I thought you said me. So, because it's all about me, right? Yeah. It's all about me. Yeah. Right. Oh, so good. Yeah. No, they will. They'll throw it right back. No, actually, you're the narcissist. Yeah. No, you are. Yeah, I just gave this talk at Minnesota Social Service Association last year, and it's mostly therapists that are there, and one of the therapists said, I hear you, and I love it. And he said, but they're usually accusing each other of it. I said, they are. So yeah, a narcissistic person will for sure accuse the other of being narcissistic. They'll just throw it right back.
The root
That can be one of them, sure. I mean, that's the shame storm piece. You know, the person that has been in the trauma deep, 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 deep down. Because you think about, you know, the self-esteem being inflated. Well, you and I know as Christ followers, you know, in the plenty or in the want, we are supposed to be what in all things? Content, right? So, and I'm not saying we're always there all the time, by the way, right? But that's what we're trying to be, right? So, but usually the person that grew up in shame, whenever they're disagreed with, it's not a disagreement, it's an attack on them. And I'm going to win now. Because I never won. And I'm going to win. And that can be a root cause for sure. So he asked, what can be the root cause? Is it inadequacy? Is the question he asked. So that can be one root cause. It isn't always it. So please from today know that each single case is different. Each story is unique. Because otherwise there's a lot of generalizations. Oh. Love it. Repeat the name of it. Biffed? Eddie. I haven't heard of it, but it sounds great. Yep. Yeah. Right, yes. And just so you know, that book will be amazing, but we don't always light a candle after one of those conversations, right? So what we're doing is we're just doing our part well, right? We're going to do our part well, but it may not go well, right? But I love that. That's so good. So good. No. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Right? Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, we're going to lean in. We're not going to fix or manage. My wife would be very comfortable with this. So her and I do a podcast with Faith Radio every month. And her and I did one on mental health. She has depression. I certainly got some anxiety stuff and some ADHD stuff for sure, if you haven't noticed already. Right. So, but she talked about how she doesn't want to feel like a project. Right? And so I think when we're walking alongside people like that, again, mild depression is different than, you know, severe narcissism, right? Everything's on a continuum. What's the story we're dealing with? So the intense discipleship is know that we're for the other. We see their story. We're not wearing their stuff. We see their story. And again, I'm not saying we're enduring abuse. We're creating good boundaries, solid boundaries that need to be there. But we're also seeing their story. And I've just seen that matter in the long run because we're in it. We're in it for the Great Commission. We're in it for the long run, right? But I have found when you see it, you don't take it on quite as much. Does that make sense? Because you see what is true about the story. I think that matters. Thanks for that book reference. That was really good. And everybody hear the book by Eddie? Biffed? All right. Oh, Biff. Yeah, remember Biff? Yeah. There's another hand over here. Oh, did I see? Oh, gotcha. Do you have a question? Sorry.
Did someone over here have a question? Yes. And the author is Eddie.
Last name's Eddie.
So for the recording, the question is somebody has referred to her that narcissism is...
Well,
is an epidemic form or developing that way.
And the reason is, we were discussing how today, it is, at least in my experience, there are so many people you talk to that all you're doing is listening. Complete, here I am, people, they're not, oh, there you are. And it's like this person said, there's an epidemic of people like that. Like when you stop having a conversation with someone, ask yourself, how much did they find out about me?
Yeah. Yeah, and
I want to know why that is right now.
Yeah, and I would offer too, like I've seen that forever, but I think it's a little louder now. And now I think we're naming it more, and I think sometimes we're misnaming it, but I am with you, Marcy, big time on that. I mean, for me, my best friends are people where we know about each other. We talk in each other's lives, right? And most of the time, and I would offer too, some of it is a loneliness epidemic that's there too, right? People are extremely lonely and they just want to be in a room full of mirrors, like got somebody to talk to. And I believe you're right. I think there is an epidemic of it, but I think there's a lot of things that lead to that epidemic. I think it's also overdiagnosing, but I also think it's true what you're saying. And of course, in my very humble opinion, I'm not a prude about social media. It has great things to it. It's kind of quick stuff in a mirror, in a mirror, in a mirror, in a mirror, in a mirror. Just like, the best gift we can give is be for the other, for the other, for the other. And that's our call. And we don't see that very much.
What would you recommend for any of us in this room who are around people like that? What do you do about it?
Yeah, I'm a believer like, hey, to your point, whether they're high conflict or not, I'm a believer like, I'm going to let them in. I always say let each other in versus take things out on each other. I'm going to let them in and say, again, if I just met them on the street and I ask them what time it is and they tell me how to build a watch, I'm probably not going to say hey, it feels like you're, like that. What would Jesus do, right? Jesus would feed them and, right, walk alongside them and then pick the spot, right? So if I've got that kind of relationship, Marcy, though, where I know that about somebody, I'm gonna call it out. I'm just gonna say, here's what I see. What do you see? This is what I notice. What's going on? And I think those are great conversations to have. And I think it's okay to do that. We're not, picking a fight. We're just letting them in to what we see, and we're going to invite them into the conversation. So I think it's good, because once in a great while, that could be a game changer for that person. Like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that, right? And you love them, you're for them. I think they would receive it okay. If they don't, that's okay. It doesn't mean you did the wrong thing. That's the other thing that happens. Boy, it didn't go well. I didn't do the right thing. Oh, not really, right? It doesn't have to go well. So I love that. Yeah.
Narcissists kind of go around and create conflict and more conflict, and they kind of always have conflict going, and they just keep moving to the next.
Yeah, great question. Do narcissists kind of create conflicts wherever they go? I would offer, for sure, untreated borderline does what we call splitting. They kind of split people against each other. So there's a lot of that. Because the borderline always has this fear of abandonment and has affect instability as their main drivers. So they're splitting a lot of people typically in their story through exploitive moves. And narcissists that especially have that sixth symptom going on of exploitation, they'll do. I mean, we all gossip, and that's why Proverbs says what it says, right? It's like a rich morsel. Ooh, yuck, right? Did I get it right? Is that Proverbs, pastors? Did I get that right? Yes. Okay, great. Dan would have rebuked me afterward. Just kidding. That's right. So yes, I think the exploiting is, again, if they're severe, then they are intentional about the exploitation, right? If they're not severe, but they're in here and over here, they're going to create problems because they want to be right. And either you endure it and become codependent and be a yes person, or it's going to become more high conflict.
And then, do they threaten to set boundaries, like, I'm not going to talk to you, or I'm going to withhold access, I'm not going to
Very exploitive, very threatening language, right? Again, if they grew up with that kind of stuff, like they grew up with shame, they're going to create it. They're going to win that fight. That's why my book talks about that need to be right is almost like a 10th symptom of narcissistic personality disorder. Just that last word, Lorraine, that last word, Larry, just they gotta be right, they gotta win, right? It's usually because they never won.
Have you ever found a narcissist that has not had the trauma of your
Yes. Yeah, so there's certainly a swath of people that didn't grow up in trauma, but just grew up in entitlement. Either very, very permissive parenting, or people that grew up in a reasonable home, but then, I'm not, throwing stones at athletes or anything, but some people, they get the red carpet just laid out for them, and so many, they can develop that pattern, and then if they marry somebody that is codependent and a yes steer, male or female, like, ooh, now that's continuing, because the codependent's saying, the codependent always says, if I say this, he or she will do that. If I do that, then they'll do that. They're always in their head, and they're wearing the stuff versus, I'm gonna be what I call an inside-out person. That's in my book too, inside out. Here's who I am in Christ. I'm bringing it out. It might not go well, because I know they'll get yelled at, but I'm just gonna bring it, and here we go. And I'm tired of avoiding the mess. I'm gonna address the mess. So a lot of times those individuals that had special treatment bought it, wore it, and maybe they didn't have the discernment like, hey, God's God and I'm not, right? But they, let's go, I like this. And they just like it and they continue it, and then they marry somebody that endures it, and then the kids pick it up in the mail, and one of the kids will comply to it, one will run, right? Over-compliance or I'm out is usually what the narcissistic parent creates. It gives the kids two choices. Either I comply or I sneak out the back door and I'm out. Or I'm going to get in your face, and whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do the opposite.
I have a question for you. Me. Yeah. Hi. What would you say is the difference between self-centeredness and narcissism?
I think, again, self-centeredness can be on a spectrum too, right? So, yeah, I think there's a difference in moderate to severe narcissism and self-centeredness, right? So this has more intentionality to it, and the exploitation and the response that comes from either trauma or entitlement. Self-centeredness, I think, is just a common human condition that we, that usually, still at the end of the day, I think a lot of times what we see is a person has a high view of self, but I think all of us in the room would say when we have a healthy view of self, we still, Jesus didn't say love your neighbor and make sure you think you're an idiot, right? Last time I checked. So the point is, if we're kind to ourselves as God sees us, then we're going to be kind to others. So that's the difference in my opinion.
Thank you. Last question? One? Two? Well, we have three. Can you stay a
Oh,
little
yeah,
longer?
sure,
Okay.
yeah.
Go ahead, Rose. We'll get you guys.
For instance, you have 4 people growing up in a family. Dynamics are all the same. One person.
Boom,
Is
yeah.
the narcissist, is he seeing things differently? Is he imagining things differently? Is he internalizing things differently? And the rest of the family are wrong.
Right, so 4 kids in the family, 3 come out adaptive, more normal, 1 develops narcissism. I would offer it's probably some other mental health issue that is creating narcissistic edges. It may be mild autistic spectrum stuff where, this, or maybe a sensory disorder where one of the parents is maybe a little bit loud, and the 3 are going whatever, and one's going, whoa, I wore that, like, whoa, and ooh, the body's just wired like, oh, like take that on, and now they're going to hold it against, right? So, or, something happened to that kiddo, right? Some type of trauma happened that we don't know about or something, right? So, again, I'm not trying to make things up that aren't there, but if it's unique and the other 3, because what oftentimes happens in narcissism is like, most of the kids see the stuff, but only one wants to address the stuff, right? So, hey, Dad is hanging from the chandelier in Arizona by noon. He's got a drinking problem. He runs everybody over the truck emotionally. The wife is wearing it. The 4 kids are going, whoa, I guess that's just Dad. 2 of the boys married, because it usually takes a good, solid female to go, I'm not going, our kids aren't going to Arizona. We certainly aren't going to be there by noon. We'll go early, but we're not going to be there at noon. I'm not going to endure this. So sometimes what I see is one of the kids tries to create a boundary, and the other kids say, stop ruining our family. So I've seen that too. Does that make sense? Yeah.
We had 2 more questions that were up. Go ahead.
How do these people see God, Jesus,
Boy, again, I hate to put them all in the same bucket, right? I think more often than I see, they'll, with most things, whatever the issue, whatever it is, they'll utilize it for their purposes, right? Right? They'll utilize Christianity for their purposes and be pharisaical towards others versus, geez, good leaders confess when they're wrong, right? Good parents confess when they make mistakes. Good friends go, hey, that's on me, right? And God's God and I'm not. So usually my experience with people that have significant narcissism is they will utilize, if they are a person of faith or they're religious, they will use their religion or their faith as a way to continue to manipulate.
And your question,
again, please don't view that as a sweeping statement, but like for people that have it more severe, yeah. And I think, anybody's vulnerable to be a Pharisee. The first book I read when my wife and I got married is 12 Steps of How Not to Become a Pharisee by John Fisher, 1970s book. It's probably out of print for 40 years, but anyway. You got to do the upcoming Lunch and Learn, don't you?
We have one more question here. He's patiently waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I got this right. You mentioned the title of your book, Being Right versus Being Light.
Yeah, just toddmulliken.com's got the books if you want to get one. No big deal. Yeah, the book talks about more stories. I wish I could tell stories today, but just kind of stories about what happens typically. Yeah.
So
Of
Todd,
course.
thank you so much
Oh,
for
yeah,
coming
thanks for the
today and bringing
questions.
your
Thank you.
expertise. Thank you. So appreciate it. On your tables, you'll find the new listing on the front and the back for the rest of this quarter of all of our Lunch and Learns. And the next one upcoming is Thoughtful Ways to Share Love to a Griever. This is our own Lisa Holt will come here and explain her own experience and extend to you and encourage you how you can be with and walk with people who are experiencing grief at different levels. And then after that, we're in October, summer is over, and summer is over. I don't know what outside's doing. And that will be Spiritual Nurture, How to Help Your Children Fall in Love with Jesus. So come on back, join us. We love to have you. I hope that today worked out well for you. Please fill out the little card for us and have a great afternoon. Make it a good day.